Hey everyone, today we're going to be working on Unit 2 LT4 notes, multiplying monomials by polynomials. We're first going to start by remembering how to distribute. So when we go ahead and distribute, we're going to start by remembering how to distribute. So when we're distributing, we're going to take that 2 and we're going to distribute it to everything that's inside the parentheses. So I have 2 times x and I also have 2 times 4. Well, 2 times x is going to give me a 2x, and then that negative is still going to be a negative, and then 2 times 4 is 8. So when we distribute that all, it's going to come out 2x minus 8. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with number 2. Number 2 has negative 3 outside of the parentheses, and then x squared minus 1. So that negative 3 is going to get distributed to that x squared, and the negative 3 is going to get distributed to the negative 1. So a negative 3 times x squared, and you have to remember too that when there's no number in front of a x, there's actually a 1. So we're multiplying our digits, and then later we'll be multiplying our letters. So right now, negative 3 times 1 is going to give me a negative 3, and then we still have that x squared. And then I have negative 3 times negative 1. Well, if you remember right, negative times a negative is a positive. So in the middle, that's going to turn into a positive. So then I have a 3 times a 1, and that's just going to give me a 3. So this one will be my final answer. So now we're going to be using the distributive property with monomials. Okay, so our first step is distribute the monomial to each term in the polynomial, and then you're going to combine the like terms. So let's go ahead and look at this first one. So remember, if there's no number in front of a letter, there's just the number 1. And anytime you multiply by the number 1, you get that same number. So we really have 1x times, or outside of, x minus 4. And there's that 1 in front of that x. So if we were to multiply the 1 right here times the 1 right here, 1 times 1 is going to give us just a 1. Okay? Now we got to look at our x's. So when we look at our x's, remember when we multiply, we're actually adding how many are really there. So when I look, I have x to the first times x to the first. Well, remember when we multiply those, we're going to add them. So that's going to be x to the second. Okay, and then I have subtract in the middle. That's going to stay as subtract because I don't have a negative outside the parenthesis. So now I'm going to multiply my numbers together. So first I distributed this here. Now I'm going to distribute it over to that 4. So 1 times 4 is 4. And then I still have that 1x on the outside. So when I'm looking at this, I still have this x right here that's going to be distributed to the 4. There's none on the 4, but it's just going to come out on the outside right there, just with that 1x. And this is going to be our final answer. You could also write it as x squared minus 4x. Those both would work. They mean the same thing. Okay, the next one, we have 2x squared on the outside, negative 2x squared, and then x plus 3 on the inside. So I'm going to take that negative 2x, I'm going to distribute it to both of those. Okay, remember that if there's no number on the outside, there's really a 1 right here. And then I have a little tiny 1 on that x and a little tiny 1 on this x. Okay, so we're going to start by distributing that first one. So negative 2 times that 1 is going to give me a negative 2. And then I have x times x. Well, remember, when we multiply those, we add them. So that's going to give me x squared. Okay, now I'm going to take those outside numbers. So this negative 2, and I'm going to multiply it by this 3. So negative 2 times 3. So a negative times a positive gives you a negative. So that's going to be a minus in there. So minus. So negative 2 times 3 is 6. And then we still have to look at that x. So I still have this x to the first right here. I don't have any x's with my 3, so I'm just going to plop in that x to the first. And this is going to be my final answer right there. Okay, let's look at number 5. 3x on the outside of 4x minus 1. So I'm going to take that 3x and I'm going to distribute it to the 4x and to the 1. So first I'm going to look at my numbers on the outside, my coefficient, and I have a 3 right here and a 4 right there. So 3 times 4 is 12. So I'm just going to write my 12 down. And then if you remember, our x's I have an x to the first here and an x to the first here. Well, x times x is going to give me x squared because I have two of those little ones on the top. And remember, when we multiply, we add. So x squared. And then I have minus, and I don't have anything outside of that 3, so it's already a positive 3. So 3 times negative 1 is going to give you a negative 3. That minus right there will fill in for that negative. So I'm just going to put my 3 there. And I'm not quite done because now I have to look at that x that's on the outside. This x has to be distributed with that 1 too. So that x is now going to become just an x on the outside here. You can write x to the first, or you can just leave it as x, but that's going to be your final answer. And remember, you cannot combine your x squared and your x because they have a different exponent on it. They have to have the same exponent in order to combine, and those ones have different ones, so we cannot combine those ones. Okay, number 6, 2x, x squared plus 7. Okay, so we're going to start again by distributing that 2x to both of those, and there's no number in front of this x, so there's just a 1. So first I'm going to take that 2 times that 1, and I come up with 2. And then when I look, I have a little tiny 1 on this x. Okay, so I have x times x squared. So x times x squared is going to be x to the third, because I see 3 of those. Okay, now I'm going to take, oops, I changed colors, that's okay. So it's addition, and I see the 2 is positive and the 7 is positive, so it's going to stay addition in the middle. So 2 times 7 is 14. Okay, and then on the outside, I still see that I have just this x right here, and there's nothing on that 7 to add to it. So I'm just going to write, or it will remain just an x. And like I said, you can put that little 1 up there if that helps you. You don't have to. This could be just your final answer. Okay, so let's look at this number 7. So we have x squared on the outside, and then x minus 11 on the inside of the parentheses. So remember, there's no number in front, so I know I have a 1 right here, and I have a 1 right here. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, so we don't really even have to represent that. We can, but we don't have to. And then if I look on my x's, I have x squared already, and then I have x to the first. Okay, so x squared times x to the first is going to give me x to the third. And then I'm going to subtract the 11 times that x squared. Remember, we're going to take that 1 times the 11, and that's still going to give me an 11. And then there's no other x's that I can add or multiply to that. So that's just going to leave it as x squared. So x to the third minus 11x is going to be your final answer. Number 8, you have 5x on the outside, x squared plus 4x minus 2. So we're going to distribute that 5x to all 3 of those. Okay? So remember, there's no 1 in front, or there's no number in front of there, so that one's still a 1. And then when I'm looking at my x, I have a little 1 right here, and then a little 1 right there. Okay, so I'm going to take that 5, this 5 times this 1 right off the bat, and I get a 5. Okay, then I'm going to look at my x's. So now I'm going to take this x to the first times this x to the second. Well, x to the first times x to the second is going to give me x to the third. Okay, I see that it's plus, and I don't have any negative, so I know this is going to remain a plus. So the next step is take this 5. Whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. There we go. The next step is take this 5 and multiply it by this 4. Well, 5 times 4 is going to give me 20. So it's going to be plus 20. And then I have the x's that I have to look at. So now I have this x to the first and this x to the first. And x to the first times x to the first is going to give me x to the second. Okay, and then I have this minus 2. Well, I don't have another negative in there, so I know that's going to remain a negative or a minus. Okay, and then 2 times that 5 gives me a 10. And then 2 times that x to the first is just an x. So you have 5x to the third plus 20x squared minus 10x. Okay, these ones are getting a little bit more complicated because we have one set, a plus in the middle, and then another set. So we're going to kind of work at them separately and then combine them after we have it all distributed. Okay, so when we look, we have 2 and then x plus 3 in parentheses plus 3x minus 1. So I'm going to start by first distributing that 2 to the x and to the 3, and just that first set. So 2 times x gives me 2x, plus 2 times 3 gives me 6. Okay, so that's my first part. Okay, now we have to distribute the second part, this 3x, and that negative 1. Okay, I have plus in the middle, so I know it's going to remain a positive. So 3x, or 3 times x, gives me 3x. And then I have 3 times a negative 1. Well, it's only one negative, so it's going to stay negative, and 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, now that I have those, I can combine my like terms. Okay, so when I look at that, I have a 2x and a 3x. Because they both have an x on them, we can combine those. So 2 plus 3 gives me 5, and they both have an x. It just is going to stay an x. It's not going to be x squared, because remember, we only change that exponent if we're multiplying. We're just adding and subtracting here, so those ones stay the same. Okay, and then I'm going to look at my other one. So I have this 6 and this negative 3, and you have to take the negative in front of it. So this one was a positive in front of it, so it's just a positive 6. Because this one has the negative in front of it, that's going to be a negative 3. Okay, so now we have 6 minus 3. Well, 6 minus 3 is 3, and it's going to be a positive 3. So your final answer is going to be 5x plus 3. Okay, let's look at number 10. So we have a 1 in front of my x here, a 1 here, and then on those we have the little one and the little one. Okay, so let's just look at that first one right away. So 1 times 1 is 1, so I'm not going to write that down. And then x times x is going to give me x squared plus the x times the 5. So we're taking this x times that 5. Well, that 5 times the 1 before the x is still 5, and then just that final x. So this next one, we're going to take this negative. See how there's a negative there? So that negative and that 2 is going to be distributed to both those. So it's just not a 2 being distributed, it's a negative 2. So negative 2 times this 1 right here is still going to give me negative 2. So I'm just going to write that negative 2 in. And then I have an x to the first out here and an x to the first right there. So that's going to give me x to the second. And now I'm going to take that negative 2 times that 3. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative. So I'm going to leave that negative in there, and 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm going to put my 6 there. Then I have to look at those x's. Okay, so I have a 1x right here. I don't have any over here, so I'm just going to write my x right after my 6. Okay. Now I'm going to go and combine my like terms, so anything that is similar. So when I look at these, I see I have just an x and a negative 2x squared. Okay, remember, if there is an x right here, it really has a 1 in front of it. And because they both have squares on them, I can add and subtract them. So I have 1 minus 2. So a positive 1 minus 2 is going to give me a 1, and then those x squareds stay the same. Remember, you don't have to have that 1 ahead of it, but you can. Okay, the next thing I have is this 5x and this negative 6x. Don't forget to take that negative with it. So I have a positive 5 minus 6. So positive 5 minus 6, that's going to give me a negative, and that's going to give me a 1x. And that is done because we have combined what we can combine. So it is simplified as it can get. Okay, our last two. So we have 2x being distributed to those two. So 2 times 3 is 6. And x times x is going to give me x squared. I'm going to take that 2 times 5. It's going to give me 10. And there's no other x, so it's just going to leave it as an x. Okay, now I'm going to take my x right here and distribute it to all three of those. Okay, so x times x squared, it's going to give me a positive x to the third. Okay, then I have x times 2x, and that's going to give me a 2x to the second, because I had one on the outside and one on the inside. Okay, and because that minus is in front of that 7, this is going to stay a minus, and 7 times x is just going to give me 7x. Okay, so now we're going to simplify those, but remember we have to go with our biggest exponent first. So I'm looking at my exponents. This x to the third right here is my biggest exponent. So I'm going to start with that. X to the third, okay? And that's the only one, so I can just write down that x to the third. Then I'm going to look and I'm going to find all my x to the seconds. Okay, so this one is an x to the second, and this one is also an x to the second. So I have a positive 6 plus 2. So that's going to give me a positive 8x. And remember that second stays a second. We don't add those exponents. We just keep it a second. Okay, and now I'm going to look at my x's. So when I look at those, I have a 10x right here, a positive 10x, and minus 7x. Well, 10 minus 7 is 3, and it's going to be a positive 3, so I'm going to say plus 3x. So I have x to the third plus 8x squared plus 3x. And that is my final answer. Okay, number 12, our final one. So I'm going to take that 3x and distribute it to all of those. There's a little one right here. Okay, so 3 times 1 is still 3. I have x times x squared. That's going to be x to the third. 3 times 2 is a positive 6. I have an x times an x. That gives me x squared. And 3 times 1 is a positive 3. And then I just have an x. Okay, and then I'm subtracting. So remember, when you're subtracting, there's actually that negative. It's really a negative 1. So I'm distributing a negative 1 to each of those. So negative 1 times 4 is going to give me a negative 4. And then I have 2 x's, so it's going to be x squared. And then negative 1 times 5 is going to give me a negative 5. And I just have the 1x out in the beginning, so I'm just going to write that 1x. Okay, now we have to combine those or simplify them. So I'm going to start with my highest power. So 3x to the third is my highest power, and I don't have anything else to the third, so I can just write 3x to the third. Okay, then I have 6x squared and 4x squared. So I have a positive 6x squared minus, take that negative in front of it, minus 4x squared. So 6x minus 4x gives me a 2x squared. And it's going to be positive. It's a positive 2x squared. And now I'm going to look at just my x's. So I have a 3x and a negative 5x. Well, because my 5 is bigger than my 3 and it has a negative in front of it, I know my answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to just put my negative right there. So 3 minus 5 is going to give me a 2x. And then I've accounted for anything. I went from my highest power, my x to the thirds, all the way down to my lowest power. And that should be your final answer. So that concludes the end of these notes. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We will be around to help you or answer messages if you Schoology message us or send us questions. We are more than willing to help you.